A leaders' debate. Leaders' debate on Sky News. It's never been as badly moderated as the one 1 million Australians saw on Channel 9 last night. It was a shouting match where almost any clever point that Anthony Albanese or Scott Morrison thought they were making was just drowned in the noise. So in the end, your guy won. I mean, whichever man you barracked for was the best, because you just couldn't hear the other guy.
That is an outrageous slip.
It's the truth.
I'll say what Richard Marles did.
The questions that the voters...
I'll say what you want.
It's only 2 pages.
That the cabinet
it looks
has
a bit
to
like
decide.
That. There's nothing on it. And is seeking
but Scott,
to take
you can't even campaign with your treasurer.
You can't
campaign
I was with him today,
in Kooyong.
Anthony. I was with him today at a rally in Victoria. I've been in Kooyong with him. Yeah. So you can't just make stuff up, mate.
And really, when the debate is about whether the Prime Minister is popular in Kooyong, we know this is an election much about nothing. But of course, by then, the Labor leader was so heated up, he was even yelling over the moderator.
Rights record.
Thank you, Mr.
Albanese.
Thank you.
No, their human rights record.
We need to move on now. David Crowe, your
Something
question.
that Stuart Robert,
we have
your
a question.
best mate, went
Mr.
to China when he was the Defence Assistant Minister.
Joining me is the political panel, Michael Kroger, former Victorian Liberal President, Steve Conroy, former Labor Senator and Cabinet Minister. Gentlemen, can I ask you both the big moment of this debate last night for you? Start with you, Steve Conroy.
Well, I thought Albo landed a couple of good, solid blows, not knockout blows. I enjoyed his quip about, fake suntans, and I thought he really put Scott Morrison under pressure around the Darwin port being allowed to be purchased, effectively for 100 years, and the Prime Minister continuing to pretend that he had nothing to do with it when Dennis Richardson ticked it off in the Defence Department, Foreign Investment Review Board ticked it off. I mean, 2 government agencies ticked it off. So I thought they were Albo's most powerful points. And forcing finally the Prime Minister to concede that it was a race to get vaccines.
Okay, look, so he ticked him off with a zinger about fake tans and an admission, all right, that the rollout hadn't been that fast. I must point out, by the way, the Darwin Port lease was signed under Malcolm Turnbull. I like the way Scott Morrison's getting all the blame. What was the big moment of this debate for you, Michael Kroger?
So I don't think it changed much, but the big issue in that debate, which didn't get the coverage it should have, was Albo's inability to say that real wages will increase under his prime ministership, because impliedly, Andrew, that's what he's subliminally told people is going to happen. And he couldn't guarantee that last night because no one can. But to me, that's the big issue because most people have got the impression their wages will be higher under an Albanese government, and there's no evidence of that whatsoever.
No, I think it's going to be a very grim 3 years for whoever wins, I must say. It's going to be a real challenge with inflation, interest rates on the rise, tough conditions overseas. For all the bright promises, I don't think either party has really come to grips with the challenges ahead. But Steve, can you explain then all that yelling? Because I think this is a function of it. It's an election much about nothing, very little to distinguish between the two parties. So it's very personal. To me, the yelling seemed to be that both men were too scared that we'd hear some zinger from the other guy. But the problem for Morrison in particular, like for Donald Trump in his first debate with Joe Biden in their election campaign, is that he didn't give Albanese enough space to say something dumb, so the whole effect was ruined.
Well, I think the format lent to Albo's natural strengths, and I mean, I've spent 30 years of my life debating with Albo on the floor of 1 million conferences from Young Labor all the way
against
to
him.
Inside
against
the cabinet
him.
room. No, you'd be surprised how many times we've been on the same side of arguments. This was a format which perversely, despite the fact that the Morrison camp wanted Channel 9 because they felt that Channel 9 would have a more aggressive approach to Albanese. Despite that, the format, I think, played into Albo's hands. I agree. I don't think it was edifying. I think both started shouting at each other. But ultimately, it was a format that favoured Albo.
No, I think that's right. But here's the problem, Michael. I thought if Morrison didn't come out with a clear win, and I don't think he did, it's a loss for him because he's got to make up ground on Labor. You see the polls today, 8 points ahead Labor is on the news poll. Ipsos, they're even further behind the Liberals. What do these polls tell you? Give up hope? Pour yourself a stiff scotch?
So what they tell you, Andrew, is that what we at the Coalition have done so far isn't working, presuming the polls are right. I think they underestimate the Morrison vote for reasons I've explained previously. But it's even with a shy Morrison voter effect, it's not enough to win. So that's not as if they haven't been trying. They've been doing their very best. They've got all the research, etc. So I think they've got to change tack a bit. Having said that, it's very easy for people in the grandstand to be giving advice as to how people should kick goals better. These guys on our side, on Labor's side, are the best people around. They're very good, right, these organisers. But you can't introduce new concepts into an election at this point. Morrison's going for a fourth term, which I've said all along is very difficult. You have to argue why you need 3 to do what you haven't been able to do in the last 9. So all of the problems are in Morrison's camp. He needs to define this debate now by 3 issues, in my view. One is, and he needs to hammer these in every interview, in every press conference, every day between now and the election, you will pay higher interest rates under Labor, and historically they're 1.5% higher. You will have lower real wages under Labor, because if you look at the history over the last 20 or 30 years, real wage increases are lower under the Labor Party. You particularly have a look at the Howard government period, how Howard and Costello did so well on real wages. And thirdly, certainly in Victoria, you'd be saying an Albanese victory will give more power to Daniel Andrews, because Morrison stood up to Albanese. Morrison stood up to Andrews. But of course it will. You've got a Labor Premier and a Labor Prime Minister. Daniel Andrews will run rings around poor old Albo.
That line might work in Victoria, but as for real wage growth, it hasn't been good for years now, before even the pandemic. For me,
9 years.
Steve, can I ask
9
you? 9
years it's been falling.
Well, there you go.
Steve, there's the same problem worldwide. There's a worldwide problem, Stephen.
No, it wasn't.
And your bloke says he can fix it.
For the 6 years of Labor government, there were modest. For the 6 years, there was modest real wage growth. That's a plus.
Oh, I better check that.
For the last 6 years. Then you get 9 years where it's just gone like this. And the Treasury documents, the government's own documents,
it's the same everywhere in the world.
A few months ago, where it's going to fall another couple of years.
Michael, it might be the same everywhere else, but that is not going to help Scott Morrison, who's going to run a scare campaign on it. You see, this is the point.
Well, it will, Andrew. Steve, it will.
I know you want to. I know you. Well, let me tell you, Michael. My beef has been from the start, and I've mentioned this before. Scott Morrison is running on his record. And the record is not brilliant. I mean, there's good parts to it, there's bad parts to it, but it's not brilliant. And he's not talking about the future while Albanese is. You said he should be making a case, although it's hard, for the next 3 years. I haven't heard that case. And I reckon this is his fatal mistake.
And I think that's a fair comment. You actually need a big policy, bold initiative to say to people, that's why you need to re-elect us. But in the absence of having any more money to spend, which you can't do, you have to actually look at the history of Labor and the history of the coalition. Labor say, they're going to do their best to increase real wages, and the Shadow Treasurer was asked the other day, and he has no idea how to do it.
Yeah, I just think
Andrew,
you can do cheap
the problem
things
that
like
Morrison's
for a start. But I've got to go, gentlemen. I'm sorry, Steve, to cut you off, but I've got to go. Steve, sorry about that, mate. I always seem to be doing this to you. Michael Kroger and Steve, sorry to you both. Apologies. Come back to you next week.